The Frozen Estate. Jonathan Hayes hadn't truly been home in 3 years. Yes, he returned each night to the sprawling Victorian mansion overlooking the rocky Maine coastline, but he merely occupied space within its walls, a ghost among antiques and echoing hallways. At 42, the founder and CEO of Hayes Innovations had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. The staff called it the museum behind his back. Not because of the expensive art adorning the walls, but because of the preservation, everything exactly as Sophia had left it before the accident. Her gardening hat still hung by the back door. Her half-finished novel remained bookmarked on the sunroom table. The east wing, where her art studio had been, remained locked entirely. "Mr. Hayes, the new housekeeper has arrived," announced Mrs. Porter, his longtime house manager, her voice cutting through his thoughts as he stared out the office window at the churning ocean below. Jonathan didn't turn around. "I thought we agreed the temporary service was sufficient." "The temporary service has sent 7 different people in 3 months. None know how to properly care for the antiques or maintain consistency with the grounds. You approved this hire last month." He vaguely remembered signing something. These days he signed whatever was placed before him and returned to his isolation. "Fine, handle it." "She's waiting to meet you, sir." Jonathan sighed, finally turning. "Is that really necessary?" Mrs. Porter's pinched expression softened slightly. "It would be courteous, considering she'll be living in the cottage." The cottage. Sophia's beloved gardener's cottage that she had renovated herself. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "Send her in, then leave us." The woman who entered moments later wasn't what he expected. Early 30s, perhaps, dressed simply in jeans and a sage-green sweater. Her auburn hair was gathered in a loose bun, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. No uniform, no servile demeanor, just clear hazel eyes that assessed him with surprising directness. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Eleanor Bailey. Everyone calls me Nora." Her voice was melodic but restrained, like someone used to controlling its volume. "Ms. Bailey," he remained behind his desk. "Mrs. Porter has likely briefed you on your duties." "She has." Nora placed a small folder on his desk. "These are my references and certifications in estate management and art preservation. I understand your home contains several valuable collections." Jonathan glanced at the folder without opening it. "The East Wing is off limits. Always. The door remains locked." If she was curious, she didn't show it. "Understood." "The temporary staff complained the house is too quiet. If that bothers you—" "It doesn't," she interrupted softly. "I appreciate quiet." Something in her tone made him actually look at her, really look. There was a steadiness to her that seemed unusual. No nervous fidgeting, no excessive smiling to please the wealthy employer. "Mrs. Porter mentioned you're a musician," he said, recalling the brief conversation when he'd signed her employment contract. "Former musician. I played cello with the Boston Symphony Orchestra for 8 years. Why would you leave that to clean someone's house?" The question was rude, and he knew it. Most would have fumbled through an answer. Nora simply held his gaze. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, Mr. Hayes. I imagine you understand that better than most." The subtle reference to his own circumstances wasn't lost on him. She wasn't being impertinent, just honest. It had been so long since someone had spoken to him without walking on eggshells that he found himself momentarily speechless. "The cottage has been closed up for some time," he finally said. "If you need anything repaired, I can manage small repairs myself. For anything significant, I'll consult Mrs. Porter." Jonathan nodded. "Then I believe we're done here." Nora picked up her folder. "Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Mr. Hayes? Sometimes silence and emptiness feel like the same thing, but they're not. Have a good afternoon." She closed the door quietly behind her, leaving Jonathan staring at the space she had occupied, her words hanging in the air of his frozen estate. Subtle melodies. 3 weeks after Nora Bailey's arrival, Jonathan noticed the first change, the scent of lemon oil and beeswax replacing the sterile cleaning products the service had used. By the 4th week, he realized the persistent draft in the main hallway had disappeared. Small things, repairs to loose floorboards, recalibrated thermostats, properly sealed windows, all done without disruption to his routine. Nora moved through the mansion like a gentle current, present but unobtrusive. She never attempted conversation beyond what was necessary, yet Jonathan found himself increasingly aware of her patterns. She worked methodically, room by room, restoring rather than merely cleaning. The antique grandfather clock in the foyer, silent for years, now chimed softly on the hour. One morning, Jonathan descended the stairs earlier than usual, unable to sleep after a night of troubling dreams. The sound reached him before he reached the main floor, a haunting, melancholy melody drifting from the conservatory. He followed it, stopping in the doorway. Nora sat with her back to him, a cello between her knees, her eyes closed as her bow glided across the strings. Sunlight spilled through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around her like tiny constellations. The piece was unfamiliar but stirring, something that spoke of longing and memory. He must have made some noise, because suddenly the music stopped. Nora turned, startled. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, I should have asked permission. You found the cello in the music room?" She carefully set the instrument aside. "Yes, it was in need of new strings and conditioning. I hope I wasn't overstepping." "It was Sophia's," he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after so long avoiding it. "She played adequately." A small smile touched Nora's lips. "She had a good teacher. The notations in her music books are excellent." Jonathan felt a tightness in his chest. "You were practicing early." "The sunrise here is beautiful. I find it's the best time to play." She rose, straightening her simple dress. "It won't happen again." "I didn't say that." The words surprised him as much as her. "The instrument should be played. Sophia would have—" He stopped, unable to continue. Nora nodded, understanding filling the silence. "I'll finish the library today. The dehumidifier I installed should help with the moisture affecting the older volumes." It was a gentle redirect, allowing him to retreat from the emotional precipice. Jonathan appreciated it more than he could express. Later that week, he found himself lingering in his office when he knew Nora would be working nearby. Her presence had somehow become less intrusive than her absence. Occasionally, he heard her humming softly, never full songs, just fragments of melody that seemed to fit the rhythm of her work. One evening, returning from a rare in-person board meeting, Jonathan found a small stack of books on his desk with a note. "These were misplaced in the wrong section. Given their subject matter, I thought they might be of interest." They were treatises on astronomical photography, a passion he had abandoned after Sophia's death. How Nora had known of his interest, he couldn't guess. The mansion, for all its grandeur, had developed a vacuum-like quality over the years, swallowing sound and light. But now, subtle signs of life had begun to emerge. Fresh flowers, not from a florist, but wildflowers gathered from the property, appeared in simple vases. Windows that had remained shuttered were occasionally left open, allowing sea breezes to circulate. Most noticeable was the change in Bronte, Jonathan's neglected Irish wolfhound. The dog, who had grown as withdrawn as her master, now greeted him at the door with renewed vigor, her coat shining and eyes bright. He discovered why when, glancing from his office window one afternoon, he spotted Nora and Bronte walking the perimeter of the property, the dog bounding ahead, then returning as if checking that Nora followed. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Jonathan ate dinner at the formal dining table rather than in his office. He told himself it was merely to appreciate Mrs. Kendrick's cooking properly, but he was aware of Nora moving quietly through the adjoining rooms, her presence somehow making the cavernous space feel less empty. "The gardens look different," he commented when she passed through with linens. Nora paused. "I've only cleared away what was dead or overgrown. The original design is still there, just waiting." Like everything in this house, Jonathan thought. Waiting for what? He wasn't certain anymore. Photographs and memories. The rain had been relentless for days, confining Jonathan to the house instead of his usual weekend escape to the office. By Sunday afternoon, restlessness drove him from his study to wander the halls like the ghost he'd become. The sound of movement from the rarely used family room drew his attention. He found Nora carefully removing books from built-in shelves, dusting each individually before returning them. A step stool allowed her to reach the highest shelves, where she was currently focused. She hadn't noticed him. "I could have maintenance do that," Jonathan said. Startled, Nora lost her balance. The box she was holding tipped as she steadied herself, spilling its contents across the floor with a clatter. Photographs, dozens of them, scattered across the hard wood. "I'm so sorry," she said, quickly descending. "I found them tucked behind some first editions. I was going to ask you where they belonged." Jonathan stared at the images spread before him. Sophia laughing on their sailboat. Sophia in Paris pretending to hold up the Eiffel Tower. The two of them on their wedding day, so young and impossibly optimistic. "Mr. Hayes?" Nora's voice seemed distant. He knelt, picking up a photo from their trip to New Zealand, the last vacation before the diagnosis. "These were supposed to be in storage." His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Nora knelt beside him, carefully gathering the scattered memories. "I can pack them away again." "Why are you really here, Miss Bailey?" The question emerged sharper than intended. A professional musician doesn't abandon her career to become a housekeeper. Nora's hands stilled. For the first time, he saw her composure waver. "I told you. You told me life takes unexpected turns." "That's not an answer." She sat back on her heels, considering him with those direct hazel eyes. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with focal dystonia, a neurological condition that affects fine motor control. For a cellist, it's career-ending. She held up her right hand, which trembled slightly. "I can still play, but not professionally." "Not at that level." Jonathan felt shame replace his suspicion. "I apologize. I shouldn't have. You're right to question. This is your home." She gathered more photos. "After months of depression, my therapist suggested finding work that combined physical activity with care for beautiful things. Estate management seemed fitting." She paused, looking at a photo of Sophia in the garden. "Your wife had a wonderful smile." Something in her simple observation broke through a layer of Jonathan's armor. "Yes," he said quietly. "She did." They sat in silence, surrounded by fragments of his past life. "Did she garden?" Nora asked gently. Jonathan nodded. "Obsessively. She could make anything grow." He found himself picking up another photo. This was in Kyoto. She was fascinated by the moss gardens there. "The cottage greenhouse still has her orchids. I've been trying to revive them." "You have?" He looked up, surprised. "They're extraordinary varieties. It seemed wrong to let them die." Nora handed him another photograph, Sophia laughing in the greenhouse, surrounded by blooming plants. For the next hour, they sat among the scattered photographs as rain drummed against the windows. Jonathan found himself sharing stories he'd locked away for years. How Sophia had insisted on camping in their backyard on their first date. Her disastrous attempt at making paella, her habit of singing off-key to opera recordings. Nora listened, occasionally asking questions, but mostly allowing him space to remember aloud. When they finally gathered all the photos, she didn't suggest storing them away again. Instead, she found an empty album on a nearby shelf. "Perhaps these should be somewhere you can see them," she said. "When you want to." That night, Jonathan sat alone with the album, turning pages slowly. The pains still present, but somehow different, less like a weight and more like a companion. From the cottage across the lawn, he could see the soft glow of lights and, faintly, the sound of cello music carrying through the rain. Part 4. Thunderstorm Confessions. The storm that hit the Maine coast that night was the worst in decades. Wind howled around the mansion's eaves, trees bent nearly horizontal, and shortly after dinner, the power failed completely. The backup generator hummed to life but provided only emergency lighting to the main house. Jonathan was checking the circuit breakers when he saw a flashlight beam bobbing across the lawn from the cottage. Minutes later, Nora appeared at the kitchen door, rain-drenched despite her jacket. "The cottage lost power completely," she explained, water dripping onto the stone floor. "The roof is leaking in 3 places. Mrs. Porter suggested I should wait it out here." Jonathan found himself nodding. "Of course. There are guest rooms upstairs." A tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed by the distinctive sound of splitting wood. They both moved to the window to see one of the old oaks had fallen, narrowly missing the greenhouse. "That was close," Nora murmured. pushing wet hair from her face. Something about the storm's ferocity and their shared moment of concern shifted the atmosphere between them. Jonathan found himself offering her dry clothes, a sweatshirt and pajama bottoms that had belonged to Sophia but had never been worn, tags still attached. While she changed, he built a fire in the rarely used hearth of the kitchen sitting area and found candles in a drawer. By the time Nora returned, the room had transformed into a warm haven against the chaos outside. "The cottage will need inspection tomorrow," Jonathan said, handing her a mug of tea. "That roof has always been problematic. I've grown fond of it, leaks and all." Nora wrapped her hands around the mug. "It feels lived in, if that makes sense. Like it has stories." Sophia renovated it herself, drove the contractors mad with her specifications. He surprised himself by smiling at the memory. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm raged. Bronte patted in and settled at Nora's feet with a contented sigh. "Traitor," Jonathan murmured to the dog, but there was no bite to it. "She misses you," Nora said quietly. "She waits by the office door sometimes." The simple observation struck deeper than intended. "I haven't been particularly present, have I? For anyone? Grief doesn't operate on a timetable, Mr. Hayes." "Jonathan," he corrected, "after all this, you might as well use my name." A flash of lightning illuminated her face, surprised but pleased. "Jonathan," she acknowledged. Perhaps it was the storm's wildness or the strangeness of the evening, but Jonathan found himself speaking words he'd never intended to share. "Sophia died because of me," he said, staring into the fire. "We argued the night before. She wanted children. I was focused on the company's expansion. She left for her sisters to clear her head." His voice faltered. "The accident happened on a road she wouldn't have been on if not for me." Nora was silent for a long moment. "My fiancé died of an aneurysm 5 years ago," she finally said. "The day before, I'd insisted on practicing rather than going hiking with him. He went alone instead." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "For the longest time, I believed if I'd gone with him, I could have saved him. Couldn't you have?" "No. The doctor said it would have happened anywhere, anytime. But logic doesn't ease guilt, does it?" Jonathan met her gaze across the firelit space. "No, it doesn't. We think we control more than we do," Nora continued softly. "That our choices determine everything. But sometimes, things just happen, Jonathan. Terrible, senseless things. How do you live with it? By acknowledging I couldn't have known. By forgiving myself a little more each day." She set her mug down. "And by believing that David wouldn't want me to stop living because he had to." The words hung between them, gentle but challenging. Outside, the storm began to subside, its fury spent. "Would Sophia want this for you?" Nora asked. "This half-life you've created?" In another context, from anyone else, the question would have angered him. But here, in this moment, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had asked him in years. "No," he admitted. "She would hate it." Nora reached across the space between them, her hand coming to rest lightly on his. The simple touch, the first human contact he'd allowed himself in years, anchored him somehow. "Then perhaps that's where you start," she said. They sat together as the storm gradually quieted. Two souls weathered by loss, finding unexpected shelter in shared understanding. New Bloom spring arrived with an explosion of color across the estate grounds. The gardens, neglected for years, had responded enthusiastically to Nora's careful attention. Daffodils lined the drive, cherry trees blossomed near the cottage, and in the greenhouse, Sophia's orchids had begun to flower again. The changes weren't limited to the grounds. Inside the mansion, rooms long closed had been open to sunlight. Photographs now adorned tables and walls, not as shrines but as celebrations of a life well lived. Music once again filled the conservatory, sometimes Nora's cello, occasionally Jonathan's tentative return to the piano. Most significantly, the east wing no longer remained locked. Jonathan had finally entered Sophia's studio one Sunday morning in April, Nora quietly supportive at his side. They'd spent the day sorting through canvases, art supplies, and unfinished projects. Some pieces were donated to the local arts center in Sophia's name. Others found new places throughout the house. At Hayes Innovations, employees noted the transformation in their CEO. He still worked diligently, but no longer lost himself in 18-hour days. He attended staff gatherings, remembered birthdays, and had even been seen laughing during meetings. The board was delighted with his renewed energy and the fresh direction he'd proposed for the company's charitable foundation, funding art therapy programs for grief support. On this particular Saturday, Jonathan stood on the terrace watching Nora in the garden below. She knelt among new plantings, Bronte lounging nearby. The sight stirred something profound within him, not just attraction, though that had grown steadily over the months, but a deeper appreciation for how thoroughly she had changed his world without ever demanding change. "The rosemary is thriving," he commented, joining her with 2 glasses of lemonade. Nora looked up, smiling as she accepted the drink. Sophia's notes said it was temperamental in this soil. Turns out it just needed better drainage. They had reached a point where mentioning Sophia felt natural, a beloved ghost whose memory no longer brought only pain. "I have something to show you," Jonathan said, "if you're finished here." Curious, Nora followed him to his office, where architectural plans were spread across his desk. "The cottage roof," he explained. "I'm having it properly renovated. New skylights, better insulation, and this," he pointed to an addition on the blueprint, "a proper music room with acoustics designed for a cello." Nora stared at the plans, then at him. "Jonathan, that's too much, is it?" He met her gaze steadily. "For months, you've restored not just this house, but its owner. You never asked for anything in return." "I was doing my job," she protested, though they both knew her role had evolved far beyond housekeeper. "Which brings me to this." Jonathan handed her an envelope. "Your termination notice." Nora took it, confusion and hurt flashing across her face. "I don't understand." "If I've overstepped, open it," he urged gently. Inside was not a termination letter, but a proposal for a new position. Director of the Hayes Foundation for Arts and Healing, with a salary that made her eyes widen. "The foundation needs someone who understands both art and loss," Jonathan explained. "Someone who can help others find their way back, as you helped me." "Jonathan." She seemed at a loss for words. "There's something else." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "These past months, you've shown me that grief isn't the end of the story. That it's possible to honor what was lost while still embracing what might be." Nora's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never intended—" "I know," he smiled. "That's precisely why it happened. You never tried to replace what I lost. You simply created space for something new to grow." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I don't know if you feel the same." His words were cut short as Nora rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but held the promise of more to come. "Is that clear enough?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. Later that evening, they walked the grounds together, planning new plantings and discussing the foundation's potential programs. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they paused by the greenhouse where Sophia's orchids bloomed in delicate profusion. "She would approve, you know," Nora said softly, her hand entwined with his, "of you finding joy again." Jonathan nodded, the familiar ache of loss now companioned by the warmth of new beginnings. "I think she orchestrated it somehow, sending the perfect person at exactly the right time." Nora smiled. Perhaps she did. Inside the house, lights glowed warmly against the gathering dusk. No longer a museum or a mausoleum, but a home again. One where grief had carved the channels that allowed love to flow once more. As they turned back toward the house, Bronte bounding ahead of them, Jonathan felt a sense of rightness settle over him. The heart that had been locked away hadn't atrophied after all. It had been waiting for the right person to find the key and the courage to use it.